I mean, as far as the county, comparing to the county.
Oh, okay. Mr. Durrett, can you hear me okay? Yes, sir. All right, very good. Before we get started, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you, sir. We're going to start in just a moment.
Yeah. It was nice, sun was out.
All right, so I'll call to order this February 11th, 2020 workshop with the Powhatan County School Board. Madam Clerk, if you'll let the minutes reflect that all members of the school board are present this evening along with Dr. Jones. We have in front of us a draft agenda for the workshop. Do any members have changes necessary to the agenda? If not, do we have a motion?
So moved?
Second.
A motion, a second to approve the draft agenda is presented. All in favor, please respond with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Draft agenda is approved. Takes us to our public comment period for our workshop. In accordance with school board policies BDDH and KD, any resident of Powhatan County may address the board during public comment. At this time, citizens are invited to address the board. When it is your turn to speak, please come to the podium and wait to be recognized by the chair. Each individual will have 3 minutes. Delegations will have 5 minutes to provide their comments. Please respect this time limitation so others may also address the board. A maximum of 30 minutes will be designated for public comment this evening. Please address your comments to the board as a whole, not individual board members, the audience, or staff, and please begin by stating your name. The board requests that all speakers maintain an environment that promotes listening and respect. The board will not respond or address issues raised by speakers during the course of public comment, and speakers are reminded that the board chair is authorized to stop or remove any speaker who uses vulgar, disruptive, or threatening language. Your acceptance and adherence to these guidelines is greatly appreciated. Public comment period is open. Once again, public comment period is open. All right, seeing no movement, I'll bring public comment period to a close. Dr. Jones, I believe you have a few presentations for us this evening.
I do, Mr. Chairman. First up, we have, I guess, our third installment of a presentation around health insurance. This is following up on a request from the board to look at how we compare to the county rates for health insurance. It's some work we've been working on for a couple of years to try to narrow the gap between what the county pays for, excuse me, certain plans and what we do. So this is the kind of a final look at where we stand in terms of our health insurance specifically at all levels, but looking specifically following up on the first two presentations that Dr. Parker did at the family level, where we know that we're a little out of out of the norm when it comes to our peer school divisions, as we saw at the last two presentations. Mr. Johns?
Good evening. You know, Dr. Jones mentioned that we talked about this, the board talked about this at the last meeting, and it's because health insurance cost to the board exceeds 8% of our budget. It's appropriate to be talking about that at this time, since we're also in budget deliberations. As we start this presentation, I'd like to remind the board and the audience that both the school and the county are on the same health insurance plan. So their premiums for each plan and each tier level are the same that we have for the school board. So the only differences are how much each employer pays. This first page of this presentation is basically our current rate sheet that we have, and it shows what that total premium is for each of the three plans, as well as how much is paid of that for or by the employer. I also have on this in the almost the second to the last column from the right, the number of participants, employees that are on each of our tier plans. And so you can see that we have a total of 618 employees. We have 189 that do not participate in our health insurance. The school board's total cost for health insurance is $3.5 million. This includes the health savings account contribution that the board makes, but it does not include our retirees and part-time employees. Our retirees, we pay some of their premium up until they're 65 and go on a Medicare plan. But basically, when it comes to the premiums, the school board's cost is $3.5 million. The second chart is the rate sheet for the county, and it has what each employee pays at each tier level, what the employer costs are, as well as the number of participants. Same setup as the chart for us. And this includes 36 employees that the county pays a non-participant $1,000 payment to at the end of each year. So their total cost is $1,250,000. So the difference in the $3.5 million the school board's paying and the $1.25 million the county's paying is $2,266,000. These next two charts shows the percentage differences or the percents that the school board's paying and that the employee pays, and the next one will compare with the county. And so if you were to look at the Key Advantage 500 plan, you can see in that middle column to the far right that our employees on Key Advantage 500 single are paying almost 12% of the premium. School board's paying 88%. Employee plus one is close to 39%, and a family is paying close to 50% of the total premium. When you compare that same plan to the county, you can see that the employee for single only is basically paying 8.5%. County's paying 91.5%. For an employee plus one, the employee's paying 32%, and the family's paying 40%, almost 41%. I think it's more clear for employees to see the dollar amount. So what I've done on this next few slides is I've taken each plan. So the first plan, the top plan, is a KA250 that we have. You see what the county's paying. For example, a county employee single pays $164 a month. A school board employee pays $176 a month. So that's a $12 difference. When you look at the bottom left of the slide, you can see the variance between the school board and county. So, for example, it's $12 for single, $45 a month for employee plus one, and $111 a month for family. If the school board were to choose to try and match what the county's paying on the 250 plan, it would cost an additional $81,108 on today's rates. Done the same thing on the Key Advantage 500 plan. And so you can see an employee only is paying $56, employee plus one is paying $391, a family $725. That compares to family for the school board of $885 a month. So looking in the bottom left corner, you can see those differences are $22, $81, and $160. And to the far right, you will see that if the school board were to choose to match what the county's paying, it'd be an additional $160,000 for the KA500 plan. Same format on the high deductible plan, and you can see that the additional cost to the school board for us to match this is $57,000. However, I want to point out that there's a difference in benefits on the high deductible plan between the county and the school board. The school board provides a $1,200 incentive for employees that are on this, and that goes to a health savings account in the employee's name. This chart doesn't factor that difference in. So equalize that in the high deductible plan. And so you can see for an employee only, in this one instance of all of the tiers, a school board employee is better off, they're paying less. They're actually, instead of paying instead of, they are actually gaining because of that $1,200 a month. And so we're better off in this one instance than a county employee. So in looking at all of this data, there were several comments that I wanted to, make for the board's consideration. If you look at the school board cost, and in this example, I've got the 3.4 million instead of 3.5 because I don't have the health savings contribution in this number. And also for the county, I don't have the $1,000 a year that they give their non-participating employees. So basically, we're at a 3-to-1 ratio of our costs compared to the county cost. And so what that means is if the county decides to spend $1 towards premiums, in order for the school board to achieve the same effect, they've got to spend $3. So it's a significant difference in cost for us simply because of the number of employees that we have versus the number they have. The next bottom part of this slide, there is a difference in the fact that the county provides that benefit to all of their employees, 100%, because their employees that do not participate in the group health plan receive $1,000 at the end of the year, but they do have to show that they have insurance elsewhere for that. In the school division case, 69% of our employees participate in our health insurance. So 69% of our employees receive a benefit, a health insurance benefit. So additional comments and food for thought. Like I said, the school division provides the $1,200 health savings account incentive. The county does not. The county provides $1,000 to their non-participants. The school division does not. So if we were to match what the county does, another question that should be addressed and decided is, would we continue to assess the health savings account contribution, or would we not? Would we provide a $1,000 benefit for non-participants, or would we not? And so I hope that is enough data for the board to answer your questions, but I'd be happy to try to answer any additional ones that you may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johns.
Yes, sir.
Board members have questions or comments for Mr. Johns or for Dr. Jones? Mr. Johns, I appreciate the additional information. At this time of the year, this is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be considering and talking about. So I appreciate you bringing this forward for us tonight. Thank you for doing that. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Goldman.
Basically match the county across this almost $500,000. Looking at the budget sheet, 2% raise is basically cost us $700,000. I want, this insurance thing always concerns me for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is it's inequitable as we try to apply, which is no way to make it fair. Dollars and cents to everybody. Try to do the best you can. My question would be, would employees rather us tackle, if we had $500,000 to spend, would employees rather us tackle trying to somehow equalize the insurance rates, or would they rather have another 1.5% raise? So it's just something to think about. I don't know how I would, don't know what I'm, as we go through this, I'm not sure how I'll decide I want to go. It's just a question as I was looking at this, what would I rather have?
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Jones.
If I could just respond, and I agree completely with Mr. Cole's point. I think one other thing that we learned over these previous presentations on healthcare premiums is that we're also, at least in 2 instances, maybe 3 instances, at a competitive disadvantage with those around us because of our healthcare rate. So I think that's something that we also need to consider, is if we're losing employees or not attracting good talent because of specifically where the family rate is, because we seem to be about in the median with the single and +1, but at the family rate, there does seem to be some inequity in terms of what we offer versus many of our neighbors. So that's just another factor I want to make sure we're aware of and considering as we look forward to some tough decisions.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jones, and I appreciate those comments. This is available to our employees, and I think it's very important to remain an employer that's able to retain qualified staff and recruit qualified staff. We have to make sure that the benefits package is appropriate. So, whether it's this year in our budget or it's a future year, I think this is exactly the sort of thing that we need to talk about and make sure that we as a board are providing you what you need in order to be able to recruit and retain those people that really are the backbone of what we do. I mean, our staff are the people who make our school system successful. So, other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Mr. Johns.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate your time and your efforts, sir. Dr. Jones.
Yes, sir. The next presentation is our first budget presentation. We had posted this presentation Thursday afternoon, as our practice is, to notice the public and give the board time to review all of the documents. I have additional information that we received yesterday afternoon from the county about some proposed contribution from the county to our budget. This presentation does not reflect that because I didn't want to confuse matters by updating this presentation. However, after I go through the presentation, we do have an updated revenue expenditure sheet that takes into account this latest information that we just received yesterday. And once it's presented to the board and to the public who's watching or listening at home, we'll update this information on board docs so that it has the most current information. But if I could, I'd like to go through the presentation at this time. As we always do, we take a look at kind of where we are in terms of meeting our goals, which of course is the purpose of our budget, to fund our work that we do and making sure that we're meeting our goals. I've listed here some of how we've met our strategic plan goals in our 4 main goals. I'm not going to go through all of these individually. You've seen these in presentations over the last several months. But I think it's important, again, for the public to be aware and for our staff to be aware of all the great things that have been happening and that what we've been able to accomplish in this first year plus of the strategic plan, along personalized learning, leveraging talent, which is goal 2, goal 3, investing in the community, and goal 4, culture and well-being. So I can go over any of those in more detail if the board would like. My plan is to kind of move forward to where we are in the budget. The next thing that, some information that hasn't been shared before, but it's been asked of us recently to take a look at staffing levels over the last 6 years, 7 years. So here's a chart that kind of shows where we were in 13-14 for classroom teachers. And we picked 13-14 because it's far enough after the Great Recession that we'd stopped making cuts and reductions in our staff, and we're back at, at somewhat normal levels. But this shows our staffing over the last 7 years. You can see for general ed teachers, we're up 1 teacher. Special ed, we're up 0.8 of a teacher. So we've gone up 1.8 teachers in that 7-year time frame. For paraprofessionals, for general ed, education, we've gone up 4.5, and special ed, we've gone up 10.5 positions. I will point out that a lot of the paraprofessionals, particularly for special education, are driven by the IEP process for our students. So a lot of those choices are out of our control to some extent based on the needs of our students and the IEP that our team, along with the parents and the student, create. So there's some total staff numbers there. We excluded bus drivers and assistants just to restrict ourselves to this, although our bus driving numbers haven't changed over that time period either for the most part, although we're always looking for bus drivers. But you can see where we are. Note the asterisk in 18-19 is when we outsourced food service, so that's why you see the dip in total staff in that year and the subsequent year. And then we've also included student enrollment, which has gone up and down a little bit, but has basically stayed flat. We are projecting to see a pretty sizable increase next year, which is, I believe, the next slide. But really the reason I wanted to show this slide on staffing levels is there seems to be a perception in some people that I talk to in the community that we just add staff, and even though our enrollment is staying flat. And this slide clearly shows that that's not the case, that we have stayed relatively level when it comes to staffing, both at the teacher level, paraprofessional level, and the total staff level.
Thank you for including that.
All right, questions for Dr. Jones?
What year, remind me what year we closed this building?
We closed this building,
About a couple of years ago.
yeah, two years ago? Yeah.
So we consolidated the schools, the middle school and the junior high school 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Excuse me?
When we moved over here from the junior high and moved 5th grade down, so 15, 16.
Okay, I was trying to see whether there was any big difference in staff when we did that. There is not.
No, there hasn't been a big difference in that. We were able to place all of our teachers. I think we had one position that we kind of held over because there was an existing staff member in it as a result of that consolidation. And that staff member happens to be retiring at the end of this year, so we will have that one position, which is the one that we've held on to. He's been providing services to students and working with students in a full teaching capacity, but that was the only position that we kind of had that wasn't utilized in a traditional sense.
Yeah, I think we did fold in some administrative staff and clerical staff at that point.
We did, yep. We
Moved
did
them to
reduce-
spots.
Right, exactly. We moved some to other spot. We had some attrition through retirement or resignations that we were able to fill. That's correct.
It would be interesting to see a comparison on the county side like this.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Emel?
Okay. So, Dr. Jones, do you suppose that when people are saying we add, in the budget, it always shows that we're adding so many positions? So maybe that's where the confusion is each year when you have a budget, you added we add positions because of our needs.
Right.
So do you think that's where maybe people are thinking that that's all we do is add?
It could be, and we try to point out when we add positions, if we're doing it through attrition or through reallocating resources to add a position, we try to include that in the budget to make that clear, but sometimes that's not, to the lay person, isn't something that's easily discernible for them.
Other questions or comments?
This next graph just shows enrollment figures. You can see that we've been around, between 4,200 and 4,300 for the last several years. The important number here is that we are slated to go up to 4,330, which is the highest that we've been since 2011, 2012, I believe, if I'm reading the chart correctly. So we are expecting to see a sizable 48 student bump is what we're being forecast for and funded at for next year. The next slide is one that we show every year. It's just average class size. It's broken down at the secondary level by content area and at the grade level by the elementary schools. You can see some fluctuation, but in general, our class sizes have maintained where they've currently been. We went up 0.1 student division-wide at the elementary level, and at the secondary level have stayed relatively flat when you average it all out, although we've seen some increases in some areas based on decisions that the schools make in terms of staffing. But I'm happy to report that we continue to have a really good PTR and one that's much better than most of our neighbors. The next slide is one that we also see every year, and that's kind of comparison of our per pupil costs to the state average and the difference therein. You can see that the last year that we have that data for is 2018, and that gap between us and the state is at the largest that it's been, over $1,500 between what we spend to educate students, $11,032 in 2018, and the state average, which is $12,548. In previous years, we've added in how we compare to our neighbors, and certainly we can pull that data as well, but we typically are lower than most of our neighbors, or right at the level that most of our neighbors are at. And you can see that there are 88 school divisions in Virginia out of the 132 that have a higher per pupil cost than Powhatan does.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Mr. Cole.
just I pointed this out last year, and you look at this graph and you say, well, we're below the state average, but we're still going up. And I think that we need to understand that increase has been largely due to personnel, and not more personnel, but basically VRS, insurance, and trying to get a raise or two. So when you consider that 80-some% of our budget is personnel, then most of this increase over the from 2008, last 10 years, has been personnel driven, by and large. At least I think I'm accurate in saying that.
Yes, that would definitely be accurate. Between healthcare costs, VRS, and any raises that we give accounts for almost all of that increase that we've seen over the last few years.
So am I reading that correctly? And it's in green in your presentation, but so out of the 132 school districts in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we rank number 88 or 89 in terms of cost? 89th,
Right.
I guess?
80, well, yes.
So we do it more effectively than 88 of our peers.
Certainly more effectively in my mind, but definitively less expensively,
There you go.
if that's a
All right.
word in my
We'll say that it is.
Fed-induced brain.
All right, thank you, sir. I just
Sure.
wanted to make sure we all.
Yep, that's correct. The next slide has some information on it that we have started doing every 2 years, comparing certain job types to our neighbors in 13 school divisions in terms of where we rank. The previous, or the board's stated goal for the last several years has been to be at the median in this level, and you can see that we're close to that in some categories and not or a little further away in other categories of employees. But that's kind of where we are. And we don't have full data at this point in terms of what other school divisions are recommending in their budget, because some school divisions haven't presented that information yet. But everybody that I've checked with out of those 13, which is most of them, are recommending at least a 2% raise for their employees in their current budget. So as we get throughout this process, we'll be able to gather that data more specifically, but I know that all of our neighbors around us are recommending at least a 2% raise, and several of them even more than 2%. So just the information to keep in mind as we go through the process. We also wanted to go through in this budget and go through some of the savings and the ways that we've helped save money or diverted money from different funds. The first that we're going to take a look at is the CIP. And while that's not part of the general fund budget, it is part of this general budget process. And to remind the board, and I know they're aware, that we did complete 2 major CIP projects under budget over the last couple years. $465,567 was returned to the county because we were under budget on both Powhatan Middle School and the joint garage. We also have established a CIP reserve fund where dollars at the end of the fiscal year go into that fund and help offset some CIP costs. Since its establishment in 2015, we have accumulated just north of $1.7 million in that CIP reserve fund, and it has already helped us in some areas that we planned for and some that we didn't. When the chiller at the high school unexpectedly went out, that was paid for out of the reserve fund. We were able to use $62,000 of that to offset some shortfall in the transportation facility based on equipment that we needed in there. And then the train project, which we just completed, the $500,000 down payment to start that project was taken out of that reserve fund. Some of the projects that we've done have also helped reduce our needs when it comes to capital improvement. And that number's a big one, $9.39 million that we've been able to reduce our CIP funding requests for as a result of contracts with Train and Sun Tribe Solar. The Sun Tribe contract was able to replace a sloped roof at Powhatan Elementary that had become, was at end of life and really needed to be replaced. It had been in the CIP for several years, but was deferred for other priorities, both at the county level and the school level. That was $340,000 that we were able to accomplish as part of that Sun Tribe contract. And of course, the big energy performance contract that we are wrapping up with Train, we were able to address our 2 biggest needs, which were major mechanical replacement items at both Pocahontas Elementary and Powhatan Elementary, and that reduced the CIP by itself just over $9 million. We also, as part of the process of closing this school and transitioning to the PLC, we were able to realize some savings of that, $650,000 because of reduction of some staff over 3 years, FY17 through 19. We returned that $650,000 back to the county and did that even a year earlier than we needed to complete that project and to open Powhatan Middle School. While we've been working to save money and to reduce our costs at every opportunity that we can, we've also been hit pretty hard with reduction in state funding. Powhatan's not alone in that. Many of the localities throughout the state have not recovered from FY 2009, which was the beginning of the Great Recession. You can see from this slide, our reduction in state aid. You can see that from 2009, we're getting about $400 less than per student from the state in FY 19 and 20, and just over $300 less per student from 2009 to this current budget that we're working on. So we're still digging out of the hole of the Great Recession in terms of state funding and have In general, in this year's budget, about $1.3 million less than we would have in 2009 levels as a result of reduction in state aid. And certainly we appreciate the state aid that we've received over the last few years and the increases that we have, but it's still not where we were over 10 years ago. In addition to that, we've absorbed a lot of mandated budget increases. This is a slide that we've talked about in previous years, but just has a little more detail in it. If you include VRS increases that were mandated by the state, salary raises that, while they weren't mandated, we wanted to take advantage of because it was money coming from the state to give our employees raises, and also group health insurance increases. We've seen budget increases that have been mandated, and this is what Mr. Cole referred to previously, of over $8 million since FY12 in our budget that really go towards personnel costs and benefits. And then the last factor that's really changed the game for Powhatan County Public Schools is the Composite Index. This is the measure that determines how much funding we receive from the state. In FY 15 and 16, our Composite Index was 0.39. That means we received 61% of dollars from the state, 39% from the locality. And you can see that the Composite Index has gone up each of the last 3 bienniums to where we are currently at 0.4507. So what this means is, based on the state calculations, what the state is telling us through their funding model is that the locality has a greater capacity to fund public education, and therefore the state is going to reduce its funding levels. And you can see that total number just since FY17, if we had stayed at the 0.3913 Composite Index, our budget money from the state would be close to $4 million additionally. That's been a big number for us to absorb, and certainly we appreciate the county stepping up in previous years and funding us at certain levels so that we could cover this gap and still meet our needs. But it is something that it looks like it's a trend that may continue into the future and something that we need to be well aware of. So against that backdrop, we've started working on this budget, and this slide is kind of a summary of a quick summary of the revenue and expenditure summary sheet that we're going to go over in just a minute. But you can see here that we have proposed revenue changes. The state increase is $678,281. That's the governor's proposed budget, as a reminder. We still don't know where that final number is going to be, but that's the governor's proposed budget. At the time that this presentation was created, as I mentioned at the beginning of it, we didn't know what the local share was going to be, so we just left that TBD. I'll let you know what that is after we finish this presentation. And then additional $26,000 from federal and local sources. So our total increase is just over $700,000 in revenues. We have these proposed expenditure changes that we've included based on budget requests that we received from the school level as well as departmentally, and some mandated changes. We have a VRS increase of $46,000, 1%. Health insurance rate increase, we have still not received these final numbers on our health rates. Mr. Johns has been on the phone with our contact and our broker for that on a daily basis, trying to get that final number to no avail. They're still working on it, but we have a placeholder of a 5% increase in what that would cost. We have some adjustments to family rates that we are proposing based on some presentations that we've done and some information that you received tonight that I'll go into more detail in a minute, of $136,000. Positions and stipends that have come forward at this point is $166,000. We've included a salary increase from all staff of at least 2% and 3% for our bus drivers. That's over $700,000. And then we have line item requests, which are requests coming from schools, and that includes not just material, supplies, equipment, but also fuel costs and other electricity and those types of things. So you can see a pretty sizable gap between what our expenditure requests are and our revenue changes when we completed this presentation. So I'd like to go over real quick where our budget priorities are and share with the board a little more detail on those. I think we've talked about the 2% salary increase. The board, when they were talking about priorities for the budget, made it clear that compensation for our employees was a top priority, and we've included this number in here under Goal 2, leveraging talent. Goal 1, personalized learning, we will need an additional, at this point, need an additional 1.0 FTE as a sped teacher based on caseloads and student needs. Is not something that we feel like that we cannot move forward with and still meet the requirements of educating our students with disabilities. Also under Goal 1, personalized learning, we've added a 1.0 library assistant. This is a request that came from the schools. This would be a 0.4 at Flat Rock to make that a full-time position, and 0.6 at the high school because of the work that they're doing at the high school to provide some additional assistance in the high school library, or learning commons, excuse me. Then Goal 2, under leveraging talent, we were looking to fund lower family costs for healthcare in the 500 and high deductible plan. This goes back to what we were talking about during the presentation about where we are at odds with some of our neighbors in terms of how we fund and the costs for family plans within our healthcare. So what we did, because as a starting point, is that $136,000, if you remember the healthcare presentation, that would include the gap between us and the county funding, between our funding and the county funding at the family level for our 500 plan, which is our base plan that we provide more resources for, and the 8 high deductible plan for our families. And that comes out to $136,392. So what that funding would allow us to do is at those two levels, we would be funding at the same level as the county. It would also help us meet that need of lowering our family costs to get us closer to competitiveness with our neighbors in those two areas that we felt like we were at a competitive disadvantage based on the research that Dr. Parker's office did. So that is one request that's come forward to start making some inroads in that, and certainly one that we can discuss and talk about and look at. We did not include funding to decrease family costs for the 250 plan. For the last several years, both the schools and the county have kind of gone with a philosophy of the 500 plan is our base plan. That's the plan that we're going to try and reduce costs at and make it more affordable for our employees, as well as the high deductible plan. We do what's required in terms of savings at the 250 level, but not doing extra than that, because in our mind, that's a choice that families make, to take that top tier plan and knowing that it may be that it will be more expensive than the 500 and the HD. That's a philosophy that we followed, as well as the county has followed for the last 3 or 4 years, and certainly that's something that we can revisit if the board has a preference to doing so. But it does follow trend lines, not just in school systems, but in private business as well, in terms of where healthcare coverage is going and what the employer is going to fund and pay for. So that's one thing that we've included into the budget, and again, that dollar figure is $136,000. We've also adding a 1.0 behavior intervention assistant. Again, this is an instructional assistant, not a teacher position at Powhatan Middle School. This person would be responsible for working on some of our challenging behaviors at the middle school, and would be an additional set of hands and ears and eyes to work with students on behavior modification and the positive behavior interventions and supports that Powhatan Middle School is implementing with great success, but certainly could use some additional assistance. And then we also have a 1.0 school counselor, and that counselor is one that's funded by the governor's budget, and one that we know that we're going to have to increase if that budget passes. This school counselor would not be, in our mind, a traditional school counselor. It says here it would focus on student wellness, like mental health and that type of thing. We also have another idea that it could be somebody who would be in charge of career guidance and work on assisting our students in getting work-based experiences. So we could go one of those two different routes. Either one would take a workload off of our current school counselors so that they could focus more on their students and still provide us to meet one of our major goals in our strategic plan. Whether we go the route of kind of a career counselor plus workplace experience placement, which is something that a lot of school divisions have started to add, or we look at this person working really on student wellness and mental health, which is another of our big needs. So we could determine that later, but we are going to have to add that position in order to meet some of the requirements of the budget. So that's kind of a summary of where our priorities are and what we are currently suggesting or recommending to the school board that we include in the budget. I'd like to now just pull up the revenue and expenditure summary sheet that's been updated. This is not online at this point, but you have hard copies in front of you. And we have hard copies in the audience if any audience members need them. And we also have it up on the screen. So Ms. Hockaday is going to pull that up, and I'm going to ask Mr. Johns to walk us through that document, please.
There we go. Well, Dr. Jones has pretty much covered all the changes in items in this, but so I'll just add a few comments. The biggest change was the good news that we got yesterday from county staff, and that is that their projected transfer to us for next year would be an additional $904,000. That amount of money is based upon a revenue neutral for the county because they did have reassessments this year that went up, but there was additional growth beyond that. And so that 904 is from the additional growth that the county has had. So that is the good news, and that helped us balance the budget. Of course, that number is subject to appropriation by the Board of Supervisors. The same with the state revenue projection that the governor proposed. That is subject to General Assembly action. So we still don't know for sure what those revenue numbers will be, but we will continue to review those. As we go down the changes in expenses, and Linda, if you would slide that down a little bit more. Dr. Jones has already addressed the FTE changes and all that kind of stuff. He talked about 4 FTEs. He talked about the health insurance and the VRS. You see seven stipend increases. Those are really minor. I mean, that is like $4,000 total for 7 adjustments. So that's a very minor change on that. It's $4,700. Of that salary projection of $722,000, what that is a 2% for all employees, and that total is $661,000. And then an additional 1% for bus drivers, so drivers would receive a total of 3%. And that additional 1% variance is $60,687. Some of our neighbors are doing a good bit more for their drivers because they've had a hard time recruiting and are doing double runs from the same school and those type things. While that's a challenge that we face and Ms. Gwaltney deals with every day and is doing a good job recruiting, we still have a lot of days where we have other staff such as, mechanics and dispatchers and things like that have to make runs for us. So we don't want to fall too far behind our neighbors and start running into more significant problems like they have. So we do want to do more for the drivers to remain competitive, and that is included in that number. Now, in the governor's proposed budget, he has proposed a 3% increase for the second year of the biennium, FY '22. But the language, as it has been for a long, long time, is that anything that we do in this year of the biennium will count towards the state goal for next year. So the incentive dollars that they would have in the second year, we would still receive those. We would just have to do another 1% in next year's budget, in the FY22 budget. On the line items, there's no real big significant changes in the line items, with the exception of in transportation and operation and maintenance. In order to balance the budget this year that we're in, FY20, we had made cuts to those two categories. We removed any equipment and additional support vehicles that we typically buy out of transportation. And so we've put those dollars back in there for next year. Those support vehicles are sped vehicles and things like that. In O&M, we had reduced their repair and maintenance budget a good bit because they were, first we needed to balance the budget. Second, they were heavily involved in the train and SunTribe solar projects. And so we felt that, we'd be able to skate by a year by reducing that. We've restored those $2. Other than that, the other changes within the line items are fairly small.
I'll also add one other statement, and then we'll be happy to take any questions or comments the board has. We did not include a line item for savings related to the energy performance contracting with Train for a couple different reasons. One, as part of that contract, we have to go a full year with them to audit what the savings are. So we can't really say what those are at this point until that audit has been done at the conclusion of year one. And then any savings that we have, our preference from staff's perspective is that those savings roll over into our capital improvement reserve fund, and that then we would be able to use money out of that fund to pay any debt service or contribution to achieving that obligation that we have that the county would want us to pay. It would be easier to do that than reducing our general fund. Those dollars are still going to end up in that reserve fund and be able to meet CIP needs, which is where the funding is coming from, and would still be able to pay off any debt service that we have on that bond that was taken out to fund that project. So that's why you don't see anything here. If you get any questions on that, it's those two reasons. But we are thankful that the county has let us know yesterday afternoon of what the local county transfer. I think they were doing some reassessments and some other work and working with a consultant to try and get their numbers more solid. So we did get the go-ahead from them to go ahead and publicize that number. So with that contribution as a placeholder and following the governor's budget, at this point we are balanced, which is a lot better place than we thought we were going to be a few weeks ago. But certainly a lot can happen between now and the end of the budget process, and there could be some changes that occur in this budget as a result of different funding levels or other requests or needs that we may have.
All right, quite a bit of information for us. Do we have questions or comments for Dr. Jones, Mr. Johns, or other staff?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, while Dr. Jones just was talking about the train project and the solar energy projects, so just refresh our memories how we're paying for that. We're paying for that at a savings in energy over the next 20 years. So, and you were, I didn't quite understand how we were going to document how we were making those payments. Would you?
Yeah, that hasn't been finalized with I think that's part of the conversation that we probably need to have with the county to come up with some common understanding. It might be a good topic for us to discuss at the joint meeting in a couple weeks. But our preference and our suggestion in talking to county staff, what we would like to do is those savings are going to be hard to quantify in a general fund. It would be our preference that there's going to be savings at the end of the year. Those savings are going to roll into our CIP reserve fund. So in practice and in theory, that fund will grow larger because of the savings that we have. And that kind of our commitment was to take those savings and help pay off the debt service, to pay off the bond specifically for the energy performance contracting. So when there is a payment that has to be made, it could be taken directly from the CIP reserve fund, and whatever that portion, our portion of that payment would be. And we've talked to the county staff about it. They seemed agreeable to that methodology, but certainly it was just a preliminary discussion at this time. Did I answer your question? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So basically then there will be a debt payment of some sort that the county will say, this is your share of that debt payment. And
Right.
this is what we're expected to contribute to.
Correct. So out of the bonds that they took out for several projects, both on the county side and our side, I think Charla and Larry would work on what is that portion that is specifically related to the energy performance contracting, and whatever that debt service is, we would be responsible for paying that out of the savings that we accrue.
That helps me. And just, the other comment is that this is probably one of the best budget presentations I've seen in terms of being concise, but also communicating the important pieces of information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mrs. Emel?
Dr. Jones, the other line items down at the bottom
Yes,
with the school resource officers.
Yes.
So is this something we haven't paid for before?
No, Powhatan is, PCPS is traditionally paid $40,000 to the sheriff's office. And that money, as I understand it, is used to pay for overtime and for officers to work our events and those types of things. The actual salaries and benefits for our SROs are paid for out of the sheriff's department. But we typically have contributed that $40,000 to help offset other costs.
Yes, sir. And we started the 65 in this year's budget, FY '20. So that's not a change for '21. That amount would stay level. It's just a note to remind the board and the public that the line items do support the SROs, and that payment is made to the sheriff's department.
Right. So last year, the Sheriff Nunnally talked to me about trying to increase SRO presence at our elementary schools. He had an idea of doing that on an hourly basis and asked if we could contribute towards that. And since we knew that was a stated goal of the board as well as a need from our community, we were able to carve $25,000 additional out to go towards that. I believe after we made that commitment, Sheriff Nunnally decided to increase those SROs at the elementary schools to a full-time position at Flat Rock and at Pocahontas Elementary. One full-time, one part-time, right. So that has been an increase, and I don't know at this point, I haven't had conversations with him, but he may come back and ask if there's additional support that could be given, but I haven't heard anything specifically from him at this point.
And then I didn't see any funding for kindergarten assistants.
We didn't receive any requests from the elementary schools for kindergarten assistants. We took all the requests that came forward. We did talk to the elementary principals about that, and they felt like the assistants that they had were sufficient to do work that we needed. We did price that position out in order of putting a kindergarten assistant in every classroom. I don't recall what that number was off the top of my head, but it was a significant number, a large monetary commitment, so I could get that number for you so that you could see what it is.
I remember getting it, that's why I'm asking, I did not see it in the budget. So I guess there's a disconnect between the teachers then and the principals as far as needs in the classroom.
I can't answer that. I know that the principals work with their staffs to move requests forward from the classroom through the budget process. And what was reported to us is that the principals, that wasn't a priority at their schools, that they had other needs that they included as part of their line item requests and there were increases at the elementary schools that are seeing increased enrollment in terms of line items.
My next question is the custodial budget. So I had asked about going back to our own in-house custodial services. I know that Dr. Tibbs has reported that our company has once again stepped up. But what I'd like to know is, for the times that they don't step up, when our building isn't cleaned, we still pay them. So are we going after them for the money that we paid them which in return we did not receive any services? That's number one. And then number two, I really do want to see us go to an in-house, back to an in-house custodial staff, so that we can have a more continuous service to our teachers and students, as well as having cleanly buildings.
I can answer your first question. We haven't assessed them any penalties at this point, but it is something that we've discussed and something that we've done with other contractors that we outsource with. I know that Dr. Tibbs has had conversations with management, with Service Solutions, about the need to have more consistent service at particularly one of our schools. They have stepped up at the other schools that we've asked for, but there is some frustration that we are having, and we know there's some frustration by some teachers and staff. So we'll continue to work with them, and a next step could be for us to hold back funding for that in order to get the message across that we're not going to pay for the work that's not being completed to the level. Now, they've completed the work that we've asked them to do, but certainly there's some questions about the quality of it and the consistency of it. You know, we did have a rough week the week before, well, last week and the week before last, with some illnesses that hit a lot of our students, and I know there were some concerns in the community about cleanliness and making sure that we were meeting that. The same illnesses that hit our students and to a lesser extent our staff hit some of our or some SSC employees, so they were shorthanded a couple days with people being out and had to bring in subs and that type of thing. So we've addressed that as well. But if it's the pleasure of the board to look at another model or some hybrid model, then certainly we can do that based on the you know, the direction from the board.
Well, it just seems that we have this problem, we continue to have the problem, and then they are spoken to about it, and then they promise that they're going to do better, and then they do for a while, and then we go back to the same thing again, where we don't have good service and cleanly buildings. So that's why I'm pushing this year, because I feel like it's a horrible cycle that we keep going into instead of addressing the problem. And from what I understand, what they pay is not a lot of money for people to take pride in their jobs and to continue working for us. And I am very concerned about us taking good care of the buildings that we are entrusted from the public to use, that we have used with their taxpayer money to build. And if we don't take good care of them, then it leads to other problems, you know, sickly buildings and mold and mildew. And I am tired of hearing of teachers and administrators more concerned about their buildings than they shouldn't be having their emphasis on that. Their emphasis should be on our students and our students' growth. And when you don't have this happening in place, it can get to be a big problem. And so that's why I would like us to address it.
Have we, Dr. Jones, have we looked at the cost to bring that service back in-house and what like for us?
We have. There would be a significant cost that we would have to incur in addition to what we're currently paying. We can pull those numbers again for you and show you. It would also be not just that cost, it'd also be the cost of managing those employees, and from an HR perspective, but also a supervisory perspective. So we probably have to add some staff to Dr. Tibbs's department to oversee the custodial services. That was a position that we had when we did have that. So that would be a additional position that we would probably look at. So we can make an estimate and then try to draw up a plan of what that would cost and bring it back to the board. We felt like in this year's budget that wasn't something that we could afford to do. But we're happy to bring those numbers back and let the board see them to make that determination.
Just speaking as an individual board member, I know Mrs. Emel has raised this issue a couple of times, and I think that this is the appropriate time to look at the cost associated with the suggestion and see what we're really talking about in terms of what the cost would be to the school board and to the schools if we decide to take the option that she has suggested.
We're happy to bring that information back to you at the next
Ms. Emel, unless you'd
meeting.
like to offer a different suggestion, I think it would be appropriate to look at.
I would like us to do that, yes. He did send that figure in an email a few weeks back.
And I believe that figure was just the savings that we realized when we reduced custodial services, several years back before I got here. So that's what that number was, just the budget savings when we did go originally. But we can do a deeper dive into that and to bring back some numbers if we were going to do this, what it would take, what it would look like.
Okay. Other questions or comments from the board? Mr. Cole.
I do appreciate Ms. Emel's concern about the cleanliness of the building. Dr. Jones and I had some emails back and forth earlier this week because one of my concerns that I've been brought to my attention. Having lived through in-house custodians as a board member and as principal, I'm not sure that is necessarily a panacea for correcting those problems. It is a job position that is hard to fill. If you survey your surrounding counties that have in-house custodial services, it's just like, it's probably worse than bus drivers and cafeteria workers in terms of trying to fill those positions. But it's something I think it is worth looking at. I'd be interested in seeing those numbers, but also very interested in how we intended to supervise those people.
Yep.
And intended to, basically staff the levels we need to staff in order to make it happen. Because supervision piece is a piece that has always been an issue, regardless of whether Service Solutions does it or whether Powhatan County Schools does it. It is a huge, huge issue that, and it's a concern and will always be a concern. When we had our in-house staff, we had complaints. I was a principal. That was one of the things that I had to routinely. And it's just something that takes work. And I'm not sure whether it's better if our staff spends time and energy on it or whether we contract with somebody else to spend time and energy on it. So I think it is worth looking into, and I'm looking forward to seeing those figures and having a further discussion on it.
All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Smith.
have we looked at other companies that are out there that do this kind of cleaning?
Yes, we went out to, when we originally went to this model, we have done RFPs since then. So we, as part of our procurement process, will interview interested parties and different companies that will come out and do that. And that's another step that we could take, is to issue an RFP. We're on, I think, a year-to-year approval now, and we're probably nearing a place where we would go out to a request for proposals and look at other companies that may want to come in and earn our business and our trust. So that would be another option for us to look at, yes.
I'm thinking that would be at least another option on the table.
All right, thank you. Other questions or comments about this subject or any other aspect of the presentation? All right, hearing none. Thank you both very much. Appreciate that. And I would echo, I would take a moment to echo Mr. Cole's comments that I do very much like the way this is presented. And I particularly appreciate you running through the historical aspects of this, particularly the slides associated with the CIP savings, the reduction in funding needs, the manner in which the savings from closing Pocahontas Middle School were managed and addressed, and really then to some of the other historical information I thought was very effective in presenting this. So thank you for putting together.
You're welcome. Our last presentation for the workshop is an update on our the grant that we received for for 2 electric school buses. We have some additional information since we initially shared this information with the board, I think the day we got the grant, if I remember correctly, or were notified about it. Some more details here that Mr. Johns is going to go through at this time.
Well, I also have Brian Bartley here in case any of y'all ask any technical questions about maintenance on buses. And Brian also really helped us apply for this grant because we had to provide a whole bunch of details about our current fleet, the age of the fleet, the mileage on the fleet, the type buses that we had, what our route was, shortest route, longest route, all those type of things, as well as where possible locations for charging stations. We did also write a narrative to go with the grant application to say why it would be beneficial to Powhatan. So a lot of work went into applying for the grant. But Dominion Energy's goals initially for this first round of 50 buses is that they're going to be distributed to 16 localities, and before the General Assembly this session are bills to increase that, with credits, and so they want to increase that to have an additional 1,000 buses by 2025. If they had 1,000 electric buses out there, these buses are going to be, when they're hooked to the charging station, they can recharge the batteries, but then Dominion can also pull from those batteries and add power to the grid. And so they would be able to power 10,000 homes in phase 2 of this initiative. And then by phase 3, they want to 50% of new buses that divisions purchase, they want them to be electric, and by 2030, they want 100% of the new buses that divisions purchase to be diesel. And then another statistic is that removing one diesel bus is equivalent to removing 5 cars as far as emissions and that kind of stuff are concerned. There were 34 divisions that applied for this grant, and this is a list of the 16 divisions that are receiving some of those 50 buses. And so you can see some of our neighbors are receiving these buses, and obviously your larger divisions are getting more than the 2 that we're getting. But this is the list of who's getting them. The Dominion's commitment to this first round is the cost of an electric bus right now is about $350,000 because there's not a lot of people buying them, so the cost is pretty high. And so Dominion bid this out between bus companies, and they only bid a 77-passenger bus. Right now we have 65 passenger buses. So what Dominion is saying is that local divisions that participate in this must pay their normal cost of a 77-passenger bus. Dominion's going to pay that difference to $350,000 or so. But the only thing that we must pay for that we don't pay for right now is they want all of these buses to have a three-point seatbelt harness on those. That's another $300, and that's included in that $104,000 local cost that you see for Powhatan. Now, if we add any additional options above the ones that are already included, our cost would be above $104,000. Dominion's going to pay for and install the charging station, for us. They will also provide training to our mechanics, our drivers, and fire and EMS. And then in the contract, Dominion's going to own the batteries and we own the bus. And they're owning the batteries because in that contract, they need the ability to charge the batteries and draw from them and put that power back into the grid. And so that's part of the contract. These are some of the requirements that Dominion has. Now, some of these we already have. We don't have rear backing cameras. That would be a nice benefit, and Dominion's paying for that because it's something they're requiring for safety. And while we haven't had a whole lot of backing instances, we've had some, and so having backup cameras would be nice. And then I'm not going to go down everything on this list, but two other points to make. They are requiring air conditioning at the dash for the batteries, and so we do have a choice that if we choose to, we can add air conditioning for the students and have two 77-passenger buses that, are air conditioned, and that, would be a nice benefit. We could use those on our summer school routes as well as some field trips and stuff like that. And then you can see the last item that we do not have right now is the seat belts, and that option is an additional $9,230. That's something we would have to pay. That cost is in that 104 that I mentioned on the previous slide.
Can I say something to that?
Ms. Ayers.
When I was at my last the conference downtown, they said that they're trying to pass state law that would require us to have seatbelts in the new buses anyway. So if they pass that, that's going to be a wash anyway. We're going to have them in all new buses.
You're absolutely right, and thank you for mentioning that because the NTSB last year did recommend that all school buses be equipped with seatbelts, so we do think that's coming. And so we will most likely in the near future face that cost anyway, so thank you for mentioning that.
So, Mr. Johns, let me ask you a follow-up question to this slide before you move on. So what is the additional cost to have air conditioning installed in those two buses?
About $11,000.
Is that total cost?
Yes, sir, that's the additional cost of $11,000. Right. So instead of 104, we might be paying, about 118 or somewhere around in there for the fully air-conditioned bus and everything.
Okay.
This is the winning bidder for this bid from Dominion is a Thomas-built bus, and this is just a picture. You can see they've got some blue writing on this particular bus. The buses that we get will either have green or blue on them so that they are designated as a electric or energy-efficient bus so that it'll stand out and you'll know it's not a normal diesel bus. So not quite sure what that's going to be yet, but it will have something different. Some of the specifications of these buses, obviously, is they are emission-free. They as far as performance is concerned, it'll drive up 65 miles an hour. They've got the 0 to 60 on here is 49 seconds. That's not fast, but anyway, they had that. The range on the batteries right now, the charging range is about 120 miles. That 120 miles will cover almost every one of our routes. Our average daily routes is 90 miles, and our shortest route is 46 miles a day, longest is 135. And so even in the middle of the day, these buses could be charging. And so even if you had them on the longest 135-mile route, it would be okay. And but you do want to keep that in mind for field trips, that 120-mile radius, because you need to recharge somewhere if your trip is over 120 miles. It takes 2 to 3 hours to charge it, and I mentioned already that it would be a bilateral charger so that it could charge as well as draw electricity, from it. Now, since we're talking about budget, this next chart is interesting, has some good data on it. Our average cost of a diesel bus for fuel is $4,400 a year. And this is based upon pulling some actual cost on 4 of our buses and doing this. Maintenance on that, which is the oil and changes and all those type things, is $2,200. So you have an annual average cost of our diesel buses of $6,800. If you expand that to 15 years, you're looking at $102,000 operating cost on a diesel bus versus $10,500 on 15 years for an electric bus. That's a significant difference, and beyond the emissions and those type things and the advantages that you get from that, this is a very attractive number. Now, DOE, has a goal of 12 years that we should change our buses out. However, we do have some that are 15 years, so to be comparative, I used 15 years in that previous slide instead of 12. But if you look at that annual variance between a diesel and an electric bus, you're at $6,125 savings a year. And so over a 15-year period, you've saved $91,000 in operating costs for each bus. And so, that can really add up. And so even if you're paying that additional cost for seat belts and air conditioning and anything else, within a 3-year period, your savings you've gonna recovered your savings for going electric versus diesel. Where we are right now is we have sent the contract over to Stacey Haney for legal review, and that is being done. So hope to get the recommended edits on that soon. We have the contract attached for the board to see on this agenda item. We'll be bringing that back for the board's review and consider approving it at a later date once we get the edits from the attorney and that we have worked with Dominion on that. Stacey Haney is working with other attorneys because all school division attorneys that are participating in this grant are doing a legal review of that contract. And so the attorneys are trying to get together so that their edits are pretty much the same for everybody. That's taking a little bit longer for her to review, but that's the process that we're going through right now. Second step is that we need to confirm with the Board of Supervisors that they will be appropriating money for us to lease purchase buses next year. Now, they've included that in the budget for years and years. I don't anticipate any problem with that, but because we'll need to issue a purchase order probably before the Board of Supervisors actually appropriate the budget, we need to get some assurance from them. County staff has indicated, yes, it's in there, but, we just need to get assurance that the supervisors are, in fact, making an appropriation for lease purchase in FY21. And then sometime over the next few months, we need to let Dominion know that we want to be in the first wave of 25 buses that are received in August, or the second wave that are received sometime after August and before December. And so that's where we are with that. So at this point in time, if there's some questions, I'll be glad to answer them, or I'll ask Brian to come up and answer them for me. It's,
All right, questions or comments from the board? Ms. Ayers?
Just a comment that this is so exciting. I've heard so many people in the community talking about this, saying good job, and it's exciting. Thank you.
Well, we're excited about it too. I mean, to me, it's a good thing for the environment, but it's also a good thing for budget-wise. Yeah.
All right, other questions or comments? I have a couple that I hope are brief. The first one is training. So you talk about in your presentation that Dominion is going to provide training to our staff on how to properly maintain the buses over the long term that we'll operate them. Have they talked to you about the level of training that's going to be provided, who will do that, where they will receive it, that sort of thing? What I really want to make sure of is that our staff is comfortable and capable of taking care of these vehicles for what we know will be an extended use.
I don't have any specific details about number of hours that they'll train and all that, but they will come here and train. And so, the training will be done here in our garage. And, and then, of course, the fire department's right next door, so we'll have to schedule with fire and EMS to get that training too. I don't know that we will train all drivers since we're only getting 2 buses, but we'll train, multiple drivers. And then going forward in the future, we'll have to train the drivers on the differences as to how you drive a electric bus versus a diesel bus. So on a diesel bus, the driver needs to mash on the gas pretty hard to get going. On an electric bus, you don't need to do that. And you also need to start your braking sooner, because the system itself will help slow the bus down. And so, but that's in the part of the training, length of the training, I don't know that yet.
All right, and where are you talking about, in the planning for this, assuming several things happen and we're able to move forward with this, where are you talking about having the charging station installed or set up?
Well, we had given Dominion 3 options. And I think our preferred option is at the bus garage, because we do have some buses that are parked at the garage overnight, and those routes start there. As you know, a lot of our buses are parked at, home. So, if it's parked at the garage, then that is, much better for us. And it is also better for us because a part of this that I didn't mention is that if Dominion is going to be pulling a charge from that bus and we happen to say we're going to use that bus the next day on a field trip, we can go in and key where they know that and don't pull a charge from the bus. And so since, the person who's going to be doing that is already at the garage, it's much better for us to have this first charging station at the garage. So that's our preference.
All right, thank you, sir. Other questions? Ms. Smith?
What is the initial cost of the diesel bus?
Well, we are paying on a diesel bus right now without the air conditioning and without seat belts about $94,000. So really, if you look at a Thomas-built bus, I mean, you can buy a cheaper bus, but a Thomas-built bus for 65 passenger, which is what we're getting, is about $94,000. That seatbelt cost is it's 104, so it's 92, 9,300. So cost difference isn't much because some of the options that Dominion is including on that bus that they're paying for are some options that we normally add to our bus anyway. And so, it's not a whole lot of difference. And as Ms. Harris pointed out, if we are required to go with seat belts, there isn't any cost difference.
All right. Other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, sir.
All right, next item on our agenda is closed session. Ms. Smith, could I ask you to make the motion under item 4A for us to enter into closed session this evening? I have sprung that on you if you would like to,
I can't get to it.
okay.
I know, right here, I know, I'm clicking on it, but it's. It's down as far as it'll go.
I can't read it because I can't see it.
Right. I recommend and make a motion to enter into closed session pursuant to Code 2.2-3711A1 to discuss the employment, resignation, and leave of specific employees, and pursuant to Code 2.2-3711A2 and A4 to discuss the expulsion and school placement of specific students, Codes 2.3-3711, A1, A2, and A4.
All right, so recommendations in the form of a motion. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
And I have an
ahead.
amendment to that.
Yes, ma'am.
That I don't think the code is on there for review of superintendent's contract. And I think we need to have that on there, because that's part of closed session.
We
So I'm
cer-
just going to
certainly
amend that.
Will be part of our closed session.
I don't know what the code is, but I'm just amending it to review his contract.
I think we need to state that if we're gonna
Okay,
do that.
so do we have to vote on that, or can we vote on it without the code?
If we're gonna have those discussions during closed session, we have to stipulate the sections of the code that we're
Okay.
applying for our closed session discussion.
Okay,
I have no problem if we want to pull up the right code sections, and if Ms. Smith would like to withdraw her motion, we can make an emotion including that.
Withdraw my motion.
or can we vote on her motion and then we can amend it?
We could, yes, ma'am. All right, so we have a motion that's on the table. Do we have a second? I think we have a second. Did you second the
Yeah.
motion? All right, motion is second. All in favor, please respond with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we are in closed session at this point.
Somebody, you're looking up the code?
I got them.
Okay. Just need to make another motion.
No,
No?
already in closed session.
We're in closed session at this point, yeah.
Oh.
Just fine.
So how do we do this?
All right.
No, I think we need to lean, on these mics, just like at other meetings, you have to put your mouth almost up to it.
Gotcha. All right, well, we're in closed session at this
Why
point.
didn't they? I asked 3 people sitting in the back to let us know if